day, dude, I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
All right, y'all. Just got back from the ABCA. Wanted to sit down and recap, some of the reflections. It's always a big time of year where you kind of get to look down and go, all right, as you guys, it's almost like every year, right? Like New Year's or Christmas or whatever. It's a natural stopping point where you stop and reflect on what's changed from this time last year. Also to give you perspective on what everybody else has got moving, what everybody else has got going on, and also give you a perspective of how you're going to move going into the next year, how you would like things to change. Even to reflection on not only what you're doing yourself, but also too within the game, and some points from there. So I want to kind of take some time, spend some time recapping some of those things, some of the perspectives, some of the things that I gained throughout this, really the last couple weeks, and really throughout if you really wanted to holistically look at these things, what's been going on throughout the last year, and some big pullaways that I had. So I wanted to kind of recap all that, bring that all together for some of this. One of the things I've always really loved about the ABCA in general has always been being able to come together, specifically the event itself, is being able to come together, meet everyone. Everyone kind of goes into their own little silos, right? Into their own little parts of the country, and they get to really reflect on, we get a moment to kind of get a glimpse into what they've been doing for over this last year, right? What has changed in their world? What has been different in their world? And it's so crazy is, again, on the other side of that, everybody's pushing from their own little areas of where the game is. And then also, I think from this point, one of the things that we really gain perspective on is, in my opinion, I feel like God can't or doesn't. He reveals himself in all of us in very unique ways. And so my perspective is I really want to know how he's moving in your life and what he's got your eyes on and what he's moving with you. And it's so great when we get in these conversations with coaches. I kind of get a interesting perspective on where things are, right? Also feel like the ABCA experience is always very different depending on who you are and what circles you're running in, right? Like your experience of the ABCA can be completely different from mine. I know that my ABCA convention experience is very different now than it was when I even first got into the game. My first ABCA experience now, I think has been about 8 or so years ago when I was an assistant coach in high school. And it was my first time ever going. I'd heard about it a couple different times, but also as a player, I don't think that you really have a lot of awareness on what the ABCA is. And I think as it has really changed for me year over year. And I think a lot of times now, even when I'm most interested in, when I go to these events, is not only dramatically changed, but also I think it could be hard for even some people to track me down in certain ways because of where I'm putting my ears, right? A lot of coaches, obviously, they have the main stage presentations for a reason. I'm almost never at the main stage presentations unless there is a very specific person that I want to hear speak. And we'll talk about that a little bit more of why that is for me. But in large, when I go to a lot of these events now, I'm actually more interested. I would say that 95% of the people that are there, maybe even more than that, might not even be as interested to talk to the people there that I want to talk to. And it's I get in these kind of like silos. Maybe I'm over by the swing cat group talking, with some of the, Burtech biomechanist, or maybe I'm talking to a biomechanist that's with the swing cat like Scott or something like that. Or I'm over at the Q-Alice's booth and I'm talking about biomechanics, from that end. And I think more than anything, it's not even so much about, I think the world in the sport of baseball has gone through this piece where we've really dove into a lot of different technology and what it can provide to as well. But I think more than anything for me, it's about having some conversations, I think in some ways that we can go really deep, and I can, the part with that community is that community of people is really stretched out, like I said, like across the country. And a lot of these people, even though I talk to them, throughout the year, a lot of the people that I interact on a constant basis with, or maybe not even on a constant basis, but at these events, it's actually hard for us all to track each other down because we're all very, I would say that group is very ambitious, and some of these people are working on some really big projects. And I think one of the things that is so interesting to me is I want to know, one, it's not even so much it might not even be new information, but maybe the packaging has changed. And while to some that might not be interesting, I think the packaging to me of information is very interesting because I'm always looking for better ways, one, to connect information, but two, also to bring clarity to how I think about things, because that helps us move quicker. That helps us reflect. That helps us expand and build layers on top of things of what we're actually doing. And I really, I've had these questions, and one of the questions that kind of came up, I gave a presentation at Rapsodo originally when I went. I've given a presentation at Rapsodo now for, I want to say like 4 or 5 years straight, probably at this point, and inside their booth. And, this one, they were a little bit last minute. We got connected at the event. Hey, what do you got with some time slots? We ended up making it happen, but I actually made the conscious choice to really expand what I would normally present on at the Rapsodo booth this year, because I think in large, and I've seen more and more coaches saying it this year, I even saw some people saying it publicly on social media, is that it takes a lot of courage to get up on stage and present ideas, and just to stand in front of that many people, right? This is, for most coaches, this is the biggest stage on where they will be presenting what they believe in front of that many people. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of preparation, and because of that, I think as a space, and I'm going to say some things that are a little challenging, but one of the things I reflected on, and I would really like us to go as a community, is I think in a lot of ways the constraint makes a lot of people want to move very conservative, or from a sense of safety, right? Like almost too safe, right? A lot of the presentations on the main stage, in my opinion, are very safe. They're presenting things in very broad generalities and generally covering these big. And again, I'm not saying this about every single presentation, because I'm actually going to expand into this, is that there's a couple people I felt like made some really good, not risky, but like challenged the norms. And even too, it's interesting because of who stayed for those presentations comparatively to the general public. I think in large, our space likes to be affirmed more than they like to be challenged. And I know that will step on a lot of people in our space's toes, but I think it's really important for someone to say that, is that if we think of our game as a whole, it's very traditional. And I think in large scope, when you look at things and you look at how many players every year are graduating and how many few coaching roles are actually available, a lot of times the resumes and what could be quoted as like the good old boys club, right, is that there's a lot of coaches that end up staying in the game for large periods of time, and doing things based on what they've seen kind of year over year, and making adaptations inside their coaching and how they're coaching and what they're focused on. I think there is a big difference between coaching and preparing for, recruiting, and what the constraints are of your program and how you guys are going to run things this year based on the constraints of the university, all those other things, comparatively to a strict focus on player development itself. The game in large, I think, has really gone to a place of, even at the professional level, of identifying talent and acquiring talent more than it is still focused on. I think we are still on the very scratches of actually developing athletes. I think even, unfortunately, even at the youth levels, we've gotten to a place of the same thing, being able to identify and acquire talent. The problem is most of us are in roles, even at the professional level, where there's not enough talent, right? And what that means is comparatively, there's some big differences and the separation of who is that good, like the drop off can be a little drastic at times. And so what I mean by this is that as much as we're attracted to the speeches of somebody like a Jay Johnson or like a Tony or, like a high end coach, the thing is though, is we're almost kind of looking at like a day in the life here, right? Like these guys are coaching in realms and they'll tell you themselves, like, Jay Johnson, right? I remember when he was at Reno for his single year, and he actually, at one point was slightly recruiting me for going. Even he probably doesn't even remember that when he was coaching at Reno back in the day. And he's gone through these different levels, but being at LSU or something like that, they're underneath very different constraints than 99% of coaches in the world, right? Especially when it comes into the baseball realm. And I think one of the biggest things, along with that, they got NILs, they got money and recruiting budgets that are nowhere close to, obviously what the normal coach has to deal with. And while it is really good, I think it's really valuable to pull information from their mindsets and how they think and all these other things too as well. A lot of their day-to-day isn't very applicable to a lot of the coaches and what they're kind of going through. And I think in large, a lot of coaches would agree with that point, but I also think in large, we are attracted to, and maybe even slightly envious of what they have accomplished or what they do constantly. And so those main stage presentations become really full, right? There's thousands of coaches that are sitting in that room trying to, every word that guy says, they're writing it down. The only thing is, one is some of those presentations that they're even making are at this point in large, a lot of their public presentations, especially on that scale, are very politically safe, right? They're not getting into so much the nuts and bolts. And we also got to remember that the head coach at a university like that is more so a CEO than they are of an actual development coach. That isn't to say that they don't develop, but in large, I think those guys would also say it is they're acquiring talent. They're fine tuning some things once they get there. But in large, every year especially with the transfer portal now, players are coming in and they're out year in and year out basis. So that makes it more of an acquisition and who can play for me right now. Now, the problem with that is if I'm trying to learn more development and what is actually player development, and specifically here, I'm going to go to one specific area, which is actually building athletes or trained athletes that have capacities that turn into the players that we all want when it comes from skill sets, the power they're able to create, the outcomes they're able to create, is that there is a very big difference in their realm of, think of it more like scouting comparatively to player development, which even in professional baseball, there are different departments, right? But just recently, especially with the retreats and the things we've had a lot of professional organizations at our last event. I think we were represented for MLB organizations or guys that have just came from organizations that all showed up within this event. Very different, very much more educated group. One of the big things, the conversations that we had with someone that I really respect in the space and is coaching at the AAA level, is he said, Joey, I don't think I don't know if player development inside Major League Baseball at large really exists anymore. He said, I think we are a identification and acquisition league. Majority of the organizations that have even the highest amounts of, not only just talent, but also to the prospects, right? The MLB has a prospects list of, these are the top, 150 prospects that are inside the MLB. These are guys that they have deemed and identified as most likely to be MLB athletes. in large, those lists are primarily made up of acquisitions from other organizations that already primarily came from a draft. So more than ever in this league, he was able to identify from being, again, someone that's actually in the thick of it, and also things that I've seen from the outside, is primarily the league is in a space of identify and acquire, and how can I use my chips, and I'm playing chess to accomplish those goals. Now, the thing is, though, is from the outside, especially from the private sector, and also to going into some of the ideas of what most coaches are doing inside of their coaching spaces, they can't just go out and acquire the top players. They can't just go out and just get the best athletes and get the best players across the board. So in large, while coaches do want to go and listen to some of these guys that might have so much that is not even applicable to what their everyday life is going to be like, and what stage or that they are in their coaching development, I think there's also should be a much higher placement placed on how do I actually develop guys that can do the things that I can't recruit. Because in large, you're not going to be able to recruit those guys. The top teams can do that. If you are not a top team, a top 10 team at the Division I level, a top 10 team at the top Division II level, if I'm not a top team in those realms, and even if I am, in top 10 D3s, top 10 NAIAs, top 10 JUCOs, all those things as well, they're going to be able to recruit. But then now you're also expanding yourself out. The guys that are going to those schools are also being recruited by the level that is also might be more attractive to that player that you're actually trying to acquire. So because of that, I think it's really important that, yes, we really love leaning in. And if you expand in your recruiting realm and what you're able to do from that side, you'll be really successful in that shape. But at the same time, really the coaches that are making the biggest jumps are going to be coaches, and especially too the coaches that are moving up and actually have the jobs. A lot of the jobs that you want to have is, you think when Jay Johnson was at Reno that he was, first off, he was looking at me. Do you think that again that's going to be top talent in the Division I world, right? Is that those coaches that have gotten those jobs, again, let's say it's softball or baseball or any of those other things too as well, is that they've learned to develop talent at schools. Like, for example, if you look at, let's go in the softball realm, for example, if you look at the job recent, let's go from Trish, for example, that is now at Texas A&M. She was at ASU, right? And then if you look at what is going on in the softball realm too as well, I'm gonna expand on these people in a minute, but I want you to look at schools like SDSU or something like that, right? In softball, and if you're not in the baseball world, you might not understand, but you might understand the principles that I'm about to lay out, is that these coaches are going to get hired at really big schools because they're winning against schools that out-recruit them, that have more money. They have no business being this good, right? Trish's at ASU had no business beating UCLA and Oregon and Washington. How at ASU are you out recruiting them, right? Especially in the realm of softball, if you know the mix and you know the history of those programs, right? It's different from sport to sport. But again, for example, if you look at SDSU right now, right, they're winning games and they've had success in the softball realm that they can't out recruit everybody, right? Now they might land a couple of recruits because the coaching staff is really good and blah, 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 blah. But also at the same time, in large, what we're missing here for a lot of coaches that would really like to coach at these top levels, like Jay Johnson is a pretty good hitting coach. And again, he doesn't get credit for that as much. But even large before he could recruit the way that he can do now is, he has developed some talent, right? And I think some of the things that, that gets overlooked with coaches that want to coach at those levels and want to do those things is they don't put a high enough priority on understanding how to holistically develop an athlete. And, I think a perfect example of this is this year they had Rachel Folden go up on the ABCA main stage, which I think was huge too, as well as one. She was AAA with the Cubs last year. She's also gone through coordinator roles, and also has really broken through a lot of different stigmas. And I think in large, it's so interesting to me is that they put her on the main stage. And also too, I know Rachel will take this with all respect, but there was a coach right before her, Division I level, right, has achieved some things. In my opinion, if there's anybody that you guys should be sitting in the room for, it's probably the things that Rachel's had to overcome in the space of baseball, and the respect that she deserves to kind of navigate through the things that she's navigated through. Not only can you learn something from that and who she is as a person, but what you could also learn from is the amount of development she's been able to achieve because of the background that she comes from in not only the private sector, but also as she moved into professional baseball. And so she did a presentation on being a swing therapist, right? And it's so funny that she picked those words because I've used them quite a bit and talk about how in large performance, when we get into this performance that has so much more to do with so many things that are happening, not only off the field, but like who they are, right? Like what's going on with that athlete. Like, you know, again, some of these athletes, she's did a great presentation and bringing these things forward that really challenged, I know the men that were sitting and women that were sitting in that room. But in large, I want to state this point too, is that Division I coach that was on stage right before her, she comes on stage and, you know, half the room empties. And in my head, I'm like, that's so interesting that that's just where this space is at, right? Not that, again, I want to go down this piece. It has nothing to do with, yeah, I'm sure there's some of those, it's like her being a female, some of these other things, but also too, just in the sense of, I know she's about to present on something that is going to be really challenging to this room. And also, she didn't let me down as she's presenting. There's some of these things as me too, as someone that is also as a big value on therapy and also overall performance and how to get the most out of our players. We want to say that, oh, this guy doesn't know how to compete enough. This guy, he needs to pull it together, and we want to do all this, throwing these things around. But when we look at the human holistically and we look at these guys and we see what do we actually need to do? How do I actually get this guy to perform? She made such a great point at one point. She said, hey, sometimes I need to basically pat a guy on the ass, even when he's being lazy, talking about, man, I love to see you get after it, or all these other things. And you know what? And a lot of coaches, and she's like, even early in my years, I might have said that guy doesn't deserve my praise or all these other things. But she's like, but if you praise them and then that leads towards where you're trying to get them to go, sometimes I got to do that too. Sometimes I have to give praise to a player that doesn't necessarily deserve my praise, in the sense of they're not doing above and beyond. But what I'm doing is I'm rewarding the activity of them taking these steps that are crucial for them to grow into the athlete or the person, right, that they need to become to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And I think some of the points that she brought up in these presentations and the amount of challenge that has come to athletes. I mean, for example, she asked in that room, she said, who in this room has attended therapy, X, Y, and Z, right? And I mean, a fraction of men actually raised their hand in that room. Let's say 20% of them just didn't want to raise their hand and they actually had achieved. It's still grossly underwhelmed. And again, I want to say this is too as well. I've seen it in every industry across the board, some of the top performers in every single field and some of the top guys at executives, top coaches, all these other things have not only performance coaches in the sense of maybe mentors and all these other things, but also too the value in therapy and learning skills. I mean, she presented on stage a perfect example of this. She talked about a principle that she learned inside of therapy, a couples therapy, of actually understanding how to acknowledge feelings and not dismiss them off the jump. And then also kind of went through a tool belt that you can kind of utilize, a system of thought that you can go through, right? That would be really useful for a coach to apply these things. This is why also too in our curriculum here at the farm, we also have a whole section on the psychology of coaching, because it is such a massive add-on as a coach to be able to utilize these things and understanding psychology of human beings, period. A lot of times things seem so confusing to us, or why would that person do that? Or what are they stuck in? Or what is holding them actually back? The things that are actually holding them back may have nothing to do with what they physically are capable of, right? They might have some major spiritual struggles, and we want to say this all the time. It's like, how mental the game is. But meanwhile, when we have coaches that are grossly not educated in an area that we say that the game has such a big impact on our game, we think that it is just a toughen up, all these other things, and go, look, this guy can do it, so why can't you do it? And And I think Rachel really pulled back the layers on some of that and started to have some of the harder conversations that I think our space really hasn't embraced as much as other realms and some other sports. And I think in large, again, a large part of that is because, again, our space would more like to be affirmed than they would like to be challenged. It's very challenging to be consistently emotionally available for our players. It's very challenging to walk these paths and have some of these deeper, harder conversations and be able to navigate the emotions of all of these 40-something players that I have around me, or 20-something players I have around me if I'm in the softball space, right? It's very challenging to be in the lives of our staff, and if I actually want to get them to produce, to know what their personal goals are, their struggles, to be consistently informed and having meetings and really know our players. That's a very challenging thing to do. It's very easy to just write them off as they don't know how to compete, they don't know how to do this, and they're not skilled enough, or et cetera. That's so easy, right? The point of a coach is actually to develop, to see where they're at, identify where they're at, but then actually take the steps of developing a plan that actually helps them get to where they're trying to go. That's your job as the coach. It's not to make smart ass remarks or to utilize, I would even say too, to challenge our space too as well, to go to events like ABCA and use it as a week to get away from my wife and kids and have some drinks with the boys, right? There's nothing wrong with having some drinks with the boys and seeing my people and doing all this stuff too. But at the same time, I want to challenge our space to want to grow. I mean, I had a conversation with somebody that was asking me some questions again, first off, them coming up and asking questions, I give them the courage for that too as well. But I also want to say that this is like, kind of gave me the epitome of the space of asking some of this stuff is, he asked me basically, how do we achieve these things by not spending any money? And in my opinion, what he was asking, by putting forward little effort. And as I'm hearing his questions, obviously those weren't the exact questions that he asked me, but that's what I'm hearing underneath the question. How do I not spend any money? How do I not make any sacrifices? How do I not put in the time that's required, right? And still achieve some of these same things? You don't. That's the answer. I gave him examples of when I was a high school baseball coach, I was getting up at 4 a.m, driving Ubers because I loved waking up at 4 a.m. with 10 inches of snow on my car and driving people to the airport because that's what I always grew up wanting to do. No, because I wanted to coach, and even at a administration that was very supportive and all these other things, at the same time, we just didn't have the funding we needed to be able to achieve the things that I wanted us to be able to achieve. Now, at the end of all of this, we won 3 times the amount of games that program has ever won. We tripled, quadrupled some of the home run numbers and all the other things. But I spent more money coaching than I made, right? Because we didn't have the funding. But at the same time, I wanted to grow. I wanted to attend these events. I wanted to learn and expand myself. I wanted to do all this other stuff. So yes, there's a lot of selfish eyes in the sense of the growth that was necessary, but also too, there's a lot of sacrifice for others. And in that a lot of players, again, I would think on the other side of this, you shouldn't be sitting there It's not about the appreciation that the administration or your head coach or external validations of any of those things, right? Like you're doing those things because you should want to grow. You should want to help your players. You should want to do those other things. And yes, it does take more money. It does take more time. It does take more sacrifices. If you're only working within the constraints of what the school's providing, I mean, that's just a platform to get to other places. And so I think the problem is it has nothing to do with that actual person that's asking those questions. First off, the point that you're asking this question is a first step in awareness of actually growing. I also told him this. I said, you know, I said this inside my presentation that I made at Rapsoda this year. I intentionally, like I said, I went 34 different slides. It was pretty in depth. I went into some deeper levels of fascia, muscle chains, things to be wary of even in the space of overexpressed chains and asymmetries and things like that as well. I kind of went into some of the deep end, some of these other areas, and then actually how that correlated over with batted ball flight, how that what we're doing in the weight room, how much that overlaps with how players are actually performing on the field. Now, I intentionally went on the deep end here because the line doesn't stop with me. There's so much information that I don't know. There's so much about the body that I still don't know. There's so much about coaching that I still don't know. And I think our space is a little too comfortable. And so I intentionally wanted to talk a little deeper and maybe frankly over a couple people's heads, because I think we need to be pushed. I think the space needs to be pushed and enlarged, that if we really want, and there's just so much room for coaches, is if you're coming up right now and you're hungry to learn information and player development and all those other things, there's so many resources. You know how hard it was connecting dots before I had like AI? You know, I'm sure people say that before they had Google and they could do certain things. Dude, I've learned so much. I was telling this and during my presentation, I said, most of the coaches that are in this room that are coaching all these other things have higher degrees than I have. Now, the problem is a lot of coaches have let their degree be the end of their education. I let the lack of my degree be the start of my education. Schooling was only one area where I became educated. And I think on the other side of that too is like I've learned more in the last 2 years than I've learned in a big part of my life and journey because of the utilization of chats. And I'm like, dude, chat is not a human being, right? You can ask it as many questions as you want and not feel like you're, hogging up their time. You can ask, and again, it doesn't say that it's always 100% right on every single thing, but it's more right than humans are not 100% right every time you're asking somebody questions and doing other things. And in large, it has led me to some really strong resources, has led me towards information. I mean, Cody was even in the room at one point. We was looking something up on Gronk, and that's Twitter's AI. And he said, Joey, it just pulled one of your tweets and used it as a reference. So now you're getting real time people talking about some of these things. It can lead you towards, you're not reading just some study or doing some other things. You're even finding some of the people that are really expanding on these things. Like you have such an opportunity now to learn and expand. And you can ask the AIs, you can ask some of those things multiple different times to break it down in different ways. Say, hey, I understand this, but can you help me understand this in a different way? This is where I have a hold up. This is how I don't see it applies. This is how blah, blah, blah. These are the holes I see. This is even when I push back, when I go, yeah, but how about this? And it goes, oh yeah, that's really interesting. There's something else for us to explore. Using it like this continued on conversation rather than I just put a question in and then whatever it spits out, it is what it is like, no, like really expanding. And I think in large why it's been a rapid growth from how much I've learned. And I also, in a lot of ways, would like the space to embrace some of these things, because at this point, there isn't an excuse of access. At this point, if you're flying all the way across the country, and I challenge myself with this, I'm going to stand in front of all these people and I'm going to do a presentation and I'm going to give them a couple of drills. Did you spend all this money to fly across the country, spend all this money on this event, all these other things so I could teach you a couple of drills? Because I could have done that through social media. I wanted to give an experience. I wanted to challenge people to a deeper level, all these other things. But also, other than that, right, this is a two-way thing. It also takes people on the other side of that, one, to also be interested in asking for more from the space, to be asking more from the ABCA, to be asking more from the speakers that are on stage, right? I think it takes a culture. The reason that they have the people on stage that they do is that in large, it's what our main market wants. It's the affirmation, it's the lifestyle exploration, it's the things that we tend to be so interested in. And I think, more than ever, we have to ask ourselves, is that where we want? Is that where we want to be? Are we the entitled ones making a little bit too many excuses for what we don't? Or do we have a generation coming behind us that will be so much more educated than our coaching staffs, that there'll be such large disconnects in what our students know? And maybe having some pride in being an educator. A coach is an educator. A lot of us also have education jobs within your coaching job. And having a little bit of pride in, I'm the teacher, I should know more. I should have more to offer. I should bring more value to the people that are coming and trying to learn from me. And I'm not just checking a box. I should know things. I should be the first one through the door to go explore these very expansive, very difficult things to understand, so that the people that come to me that don't have the time, or because they're in such a small window, a lifetime of exploration, a lifetime of growth and learning, so that I can help you get there without needing to know everything I know, because you don't have the time. And I don't mean that in a way of like excuse for you. I'm saying that maybe you're an athlete, and if you don't figure it out in the next 2 years, your career is going to be over. And so I think in large, I pay for a mechanic, not because I want to learn how to work on my car, but because he knows how to work on my car. He knows how to identify it and diagnose it. And he's put a lot of work into understanding things that I don't understand. And I think our space has forgotten that principle. And I challenge it in this time of rapid education and growth. I challenge the coaches in our space for us not to be entitled, for us to get back to work of learning and expanding our skill sets and being able to provide more, and not be utilizing these weekends for a little getaway and to see the boys and share a couple stories and get hammered and not showing up in the morning for the education meeting because you have a hangover. You know what I'm saying? I think we can do more. I think we can be better. I think that when that is the one time a year that most coaches are actually spending trying to expand their tool belt a little bit, we can do better with those opportunities, with the people that are around us. And so I know that is challenging, and I know that these conversations, there's a lot of people that haven't even made it this far into what I'm talking about here, because I'm definitely stepping on some toes. And also, too, the unfortunate thing is most of the people that need to hear that message won't be the ones listening to this podcast. But at the same time, it needs to be said. Someone needs to push that a little bit more. And I wanted to talk about that. So, you know how I like to wrap it up. Let me pray for everybody before we get going. So, Dear Heavenly Father, God, I just I pray for our community. I pray for everybody that is as they continue to travel back. I pray that everybody made it home safe and that you keep them directed and pull them back towards you, God. God, I pull you. You talk so many times throughout the Bible about what it is and how we'll be judged as teachers, right? And how will be the standard that we're held to as we lead others and the importance of leadership. I just pray that you put that back on our heart, God, that you make it important to us, that you deepen that faith that we have in that area. And we pray all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Well, until next time, Farm System out.